All characters and events in this story are the fruit of my imagination. If something seems like reality, it's just the stars aligning that way. Life is like a wheel, everything comes back in circles. Please don't judge too harshly. We are 100% against cheating, alcohol, anything prohibited, and any violation of the law. Write in the comments what city you are from and where you listen to this audio version. Share the vibe. Don't forget to like, tell your life story, and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new exciting stories. The dining room at the Wilson family's Lakeview mansion glowed in the soft light of a chandelier. The long mahogany table was set with white china and silverware, with an arrangement of white roses in the center. Michael Wilson, 35, sat at one end, his navy suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. Across from him, his wife, Emma, 33, adjusted her napkin, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun. At the head of the table, Richard Wilson, 60, leaned back, his gray hair neatly combed, exuding authority. Beside him, Elizabeth, 58, smiled tightly, her hands folded in her lap. Jason, 30, lounged on Richard's other side, his tie loosened, holding a glass of red wine. The clink of cutlery broke the silence as the family began to eat their dinner: roast lamb, mashed potatoes, and green beans prepared by the housekeeper. Michael cut into the meat, his jaw tense. These weekly dinners, which were supposed to bring the family together, always made him feel like an outsider. Jason, Richard began, breaking the silence, spoke to Tompkins today. He said the Lincoln Park project is ahead of schedule. Your numbers must look good. Jason smirked, leaning forward. Yes, Dad, last week I made arrangements with new suppliers. I knocked 10% off the materials. This will add at least $1 million to the profit per quarter. Richard nodded, his eyes sparkling with approval. This is my son. You have a head on your shoulders. Always have. Michael cleared his throat, putting down his fork. The workers are working overtime to keep this schedule, he said. I've restructured the shifts so there are no delays. We've also saved on wages. Richard looked at Michael, his face impassive. Good. Watch the workers. That's your job, right? Michael's fingers tightened on the knife. It's not just about the workers. I coordinated with the architects too. Michael, Elizabeth interrupted gently, her voice quiet but firm. Let's not talk about business all evening. How are things with the house? Are you and Emma settled in yet? Emma forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Everything is fine. The kitchen was finished last month. All that's left is to paint the guest room. Normal? Jason chuckled, sipping his wine. Emma, you have a 4-bedroom house in Bucktown. That's not normal. That's a dream. Emma blushed. It'll take time, Jason. We haven't completely unpacked our things yet. Not quite sorted out yet. Richard raised an eyebrow at Michael. You've been there for 6 months. What's holding you back? Michael shifted in his chair. Work takes up a lot of my time, Richard. The condominium project downtown takes up most of my days. Richard chuckled as he cut into the lamb. Priorities, Michael. You have to find time for your wife. Emma's smile faltered, and she reached for her glass of water. Michael clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Speaking of priorities, Jason said, leaning back, I'm meeting with the bank tomorrow. They want a quarterly report. Everything's okay, right, Dad? Richard nodded, but his gaze lingered on Jason a little longer than necessary. It would be better if it were so. We can't afford to make mistakes, especially when auditors are poking their noses in. Elizabeth frowned, her fork hovering in midair. Auditors? Something wrong? Nothing wrong, Jason said quickly, his tone sharp. Just a routine check. You know how banks work. Michael looked at Jason, his eyebrows furrowing. The usual. You didn't mention auditors last week. Jason shrugged, avoiding Michael's gaze. It's not a problem. I'll sort it out. You'll handle it, Michael insisted. If there's an audit, I need to know. I work with project budgets. Relax, Mike, Jason said, his grin tight. You handle the construction. I'll handle the numbers. Richard raised his hand to silence them. Enough. Jason can handle it. Let's eat. The room was silent again, only the clanking of knives on plates breaking the silence. Elizabeth looked at Michael, her gaze full of apology, but he looked away, concentrating on his food. Emma cleared her throat, her voice artificially cheerful. "So, Jason, what are your plans for the weekend?" Jason smirked, swirling his glass. "I think I'll take the yacht out. Lake Michigan is perfect right now. You and Michael should go." Michael snorted quietly. "Someone has to work." Jason's grin widened. "Come on, Mike. Live a little. You're always so serious." "Someone has to be," Michael muttered, stabbing his beans with his fork. "Boys," Elizabeth said, her tone sharpening, "can we have one dinner without arguing?" "Sorry, Mom," Jason said, throwing up his hands in mock surrender. "Just trying to clear the air." Michael said nothing, staring at his plate. Emma reached under the table and squeezed his hand, but he didn't respond. Richard leaned forward, his voice lower. "Jason, tell me more about the deal with the suppliers. How did you pull it off?" Jason's face brightened, and he launched into an explanation: names, numbers, verbal agreements. Richard listened attentively, nodding, asking questions. Michael ate silently, his shoulders tense. Emma tried to catch his eye, but he looked away. Elizabeth pushed her plate away, her face turning pale. "I don't feel well," she said, standing up. "I'll go get some water." Michael looked up, worried. "Are you okay, Mom?" She waved it off. "I'm just tired. Everything's fine." Richard barely looked at her. "Don't overwork yourself, Elizabeth. It's going to be a tough week." Elizabeth nodded and left the room. The conversation continued, Jason speaking loudly and confidently. Michael gripped his fork so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Michael," Emma said quietly, leaning toward him, "maybe we should take a day off. Go somewhere." Michael forced a smile. "Maybe. We'll see." Jason heard with a grin. "Here, Emma, get him out of the office. He's starting to look like his dad." Richard chuckled, but his gaze remained on Jason. "There's nothing wrong with that. This company is my legacy. You boys carry it on." Michael's smile faded. "Yes, we try." "Trying," Richard said, his tone even. "Jason's doing deals worth millions. What's your excuse?" The words hit her like a slap. Michael's face hardened, but he didn't respond. Emma squeezed his hand harder, but he pulled away. "Richard," Emma said sharply, "Michael has been working non-stop. The project at the center is on track thanks to him." Richard shrugged as he cut the meat. "This is his job. I'm waiting for the results." Jason leaned back, grinning. "Don't worry, Mike. I'll provide the money. Just make sure the hammers keep hitting." Michael's eyes narrowed. "And you make sure the books are clean, Jason." Jason's grin faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, raising his glass. "It's always like this." The tension hung in the air, thick and heavy. Elizabeth returned, still pale, and sat quietly. Dinner continued with idle chatter: Jason's plans for the yacht, Richard's golf, Emma's attempts to change the subject to something neutral. Michael was silent, his mind elsewhere. As the housekeeper cleared the plates, Richard stood up, clapping Jason on the shoulder. "Well done, son. Keep it up." Jason smirked. "Everything will be fine, Dad." Richard looked at Michael, his gaze unreadable. "Take a rest, Michael. You look tired." Michael nodded, clenching his jaw. "Certainly." Emma touched his arm as they stood up to leave. "Are you okay?" "Everything's fine," he snapped. "Let's go home." They said goodbye. Elizabeth hugged Michael tightly, her eyes looking at him intently. "Call tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll call," he promised. As Michael and Emma stepped out into the cool Chicago night, the mansion's lights glowed behind them, creating an illusion of warmth and togetherness. Inside, Jason poured more wine, laughing with Richard as Elizabeth watched from the doorway, her face clouded with worry. Michael got behind the wheel of their SUV, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Emma buckled up, her voice quiet. "Don't let him get to you." Michael started the engine, looking at the road. "I don't allow it." But as they drove, the weight of the evening settled on him, heavy and unbearable. Something was wrong. Jason's hasty dismissal of the audit, Richard's blind praise. Michael's gut instinct told him there was trouble coming. Wilson Construction's office on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper in the Chicago Loop was bathed in morning light streaming through large windows. Michael Wilson, 35, sat at his desk, covered in blueprints and budget spreadsheets. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his eyes were tiredly fixed on his laptop. Across from him, Linda Carter, 45, the company's chief financial officer, held a folder of reports. Her sharp gray suit contrasted with her intense expression, and her wire-rimmed glasses slid down her nose. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his neck. "Linda, what's wrong with you? You look like we failed an audit." Linda looked at him, her voice even but filled with concern. "They haven't failed yet, but it's a serious problem. I checked the transactions for the third quarter. $2 million went to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands through 3 contracts with a company called Apex Holdings. These contracts don't exist." Michael frowned, straightening up. "They don't exist? 2 million? What is Apex Holdings?" Linda opened the folder, taking out a printout of payment orders. "Here, 3 wire transfers for $666,000 signed by Jason. Allegedly for steel supplies for the Lincoln Park project. I checked the SAP database and contacted our suppliers ArcelorMittal, Nucor. No one knows Apex. No delivery notes, no invoices, nothing." Michael picked up the document, his eyes scanning the lines. Dates, amounts, Jason's digital signature. His heart began to beat faster. This is not a minor mistake. 2 million without documents. Who approved these payments? Linda pressed her lips together, her voice becoming quieter. "Jason. I asked him yesterday. He said it was a one-time deal with a new supplier and promised to send the documents. But he didn't send anything. I can't close the quarterly report for the bank while this is hanging." Michael put the printout down, his face hardening. "A one-time transaction for 2 million, without your approval. That's a violation of Sarbanes-Oxley, Linda. Under SOX, all transactions over 500,000 require your signature or the board's signature." "Exactly," Linda said, adjusting her glasses. "Jason knows the rules. I got a letter from the bank. They're preparing a Bank Secrecy Act audit because of suspicious transactions. If this comes to light, we'll be investigated by the IRS, maybe the FBI. Money laundering, Michael." Michael clenched his fists, his voice becoming sharper. "Money laundering. Jason should have reported it to you or me. I'm the cool Linda. I'm in charge of construction, not finance. Why did he bypass us?" Linda shrugged, her gaze wary. "I don't know, but I have to report violations. You're next in line after me. If it's not a mistake, someone might try to shift the blame. Your name is in the system, Michael. You sign off on project budgets." Michael nodded, his face grim. "I'll talk to Jason. Today, he'll explain what Apex is and where the money went. If he can't, I'll bring it up at the board." Linda stood up, taking the folder. "Be careful, and don't tell Richard until we figure this out. He might react impulsively." "It's a deal," Michael said, watching her as she left. He was left alone, staring at the printout. $2 million. An offshore account. Jason's signature. His little brother always bragged about his deals, but this was too much. Michael grabbed the phone, dialed Jason, but there was no answer. He sent a text. "Need to talk. Your office. In an hour." An hour later, Michael knocked on Jason's office door. An irritated voice came from inside. "Enter." Michael walked in. Jason was sitting at his desk, his laptop open, his phone lying next to him. His shirt was unbuttoned to the top button. His tie was lying on the chair. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his fingers were nervously fiddling with his pen. "What's the urgency, Mike?" Jason asked, not looking at him. "I'm swamped with reports for the bank." Michael closed the door, stepping towards the table. $2 million, Jason. Cayman Islands. Apex Holdings. Explain." Jason froze, his hand still. He looked up slowly, his voice strained. "What are you talking about?" Michael threw the printout on the table. Linda found this. Your signature. 3 transfers of 666,000. The suppliers don't know about Apex. No invoices, no bills. Where's the money? Jason took the paper, his fingers shaking. He swallowed, leaning back. It's a one-time deal. I told you. New supplier for Lincoln Park. Everything is fine. Are you okay? Michael raised his voice, bracing his hands on the table. Linda called ArcelorMittal. Nuker, no one had heard of Apex. That's 2 million, Jason. The bank is starting a BSA audit. If they find this, we're all going to be investigated. Jason jumped up, his eyes flashing. I said I'd handle it. These are my finances. Mike, don't interfere. Your finances. Michael stepped closer. This is our company. If you break the law, it affects everyone. Show me your documents. Now. Jason opened his mouth, but fell silent, his face turning pale. He sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. The documents will be, I need time. A day, 2 at most. Michael looked at him, his voice turning cold. You have until tomorrow, 9 a.m. If there are no documents, I'm going to Linda and the board of directors. Jason nodded, avoiding his gaze. Okay, I'll sort it out. Just don't push. Michael turned and walked out, leaving his brother alone. Jason slumped into a chair, his hands shaking. He grabbed the phone, staring at the screen. His fingers hovered over the name Dad. He swallowed, then pressed the call button, his voice quiet and shaky. Dad, it's me. We need to talk. It's urgent. Jason hung up, his face pale and his heart pounding. He knew he was in trouble, and only Richard could get him out. Richard Wilson's office was in a corner of Wilson Construction, with picture windows overlooking the lights of Michigan Avenue. The dark oak desk was covered with folders and contracts, and a map of Chicago with construction projects marked on the wall. Richard, 60, stood by the window, his gray hair neatly combed, his dark suit commanding his bearing. Jason, 30, sat across from him, fidgeting in his leather chair. His shirt was rumpled, his tie was off, and his face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. Richard turned, his voice low and harsh. You said it was urgent, Jason. I canceled the investor meeting. Speak up. Jason swallowed, his fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of the table. Dad, I'm in trouble. Linda found the transfers. 2 million to the Cayman Islands. Michael knows and demands documents. I don't have them. Richard frowned as he stepped towards the table. 2 million. You said the finances were under control. What have you done? Jason looked down, his voice shaking. I took the money from the company to cover debts. I thought I'd pay it back before the audit, but Linda's digging, and Michael won't let up. Richard clenched his fists, his face turning red. You stole 2 million from our company? Do you understand what that means? Money laundering, Jason. The IRS, the FBI, they'll crush you. And me too. Jason jumped up, his voice breaking. I didn't want to. I had debts, Dad. The casino, the yacht, the loans, everything piled up. I thought I'd close them and return the money. But now Linda and Michael apparently noticed. Richard slammed his fist on the table, causing the folders to jump. Casino? Yacht? You spent the company's money on your toys. I gave you everything, the position, the trust, and you let me down like this. Jason stepped closer, his eyes full of despair. Dad, I'm your son. You always said that family comes first. I need your help, or I'll go to jail. Is that what you want? Richard looked at him, his jaw clenched. He sat up slowly, his voice growing colder. Sit down and explain everything. From the very beginning. Jason collapsed into a chair, rubbing his neck. I signed 3 contracts with Apex Holdings. Fictitious. Transferred 666,000 to their account in the Caymans. It was supposed to be a temporary scheme. I planned to return the money through a third-party deal, but it fell through. Now Linda has found the transfers, and Michael is demanding invoices. I have nothing. Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Fictitious contracts. You violated Sarbanes-Oxley, BSA, everything. The bank has already started an audit, you know? If they find this, we're looking at fines, jail, the end of the company. Jason clenched his fists, his voice becoming quieter. I know. That's why I'm here. Michael gave me until tomorrow to show the papers. If I can't, he'll go to Linda and the council. Dad, you can fix this. You always found a way. Richard leaned back, his fingers tapping on the table. Fix it? You're asking me to cover up a theft? This isn't a small matter, Jason. This is a criminal case. Jason leaned closer, his voice pleading. Dad, if I get caught, I'll do 7 years. Money laundering, fraud, they won't spare you. But you can make sure that doesn't happen. You're the CEO. You have access to the system. We can shift the blame. Richard frowned, his voice becoming sharper. Shift the blame? To whom? Linda. Jason paused, then looked Richard in the eyes. Michael. He's the coup. His signature is on the project budgets. We can fake the SAP entries, make it look like he signed the Apex transfers. It'll work. Richard froze, his face turning to stone. You want to frame Michael, your brother? He's not my brother, Jason snapped. He's your stepson. You've always put me first. If we don't do this, I'll go to jail and the company will collapse. You'll lose everything you've built. Michael can handle it. He always got away with it. Richard was silent, his gaze heavy. He stood up, walked to the window, looking out at the city. His voice was quiet but firm. Do you understand what this means? If we do this, Michael could go to jail. Money laundering up to 7 years. Are you ready for that? Jason swallowed, his voice growing quieter. We have no choice, Dad. If I don't give the documents tomorrow, Michael will go to the council. Linda already suspects. This is the only way out. Richard turned, his eyes narrowing. These are not just documents. This is evidence forgery. Another crime. If we get caught, we both go to jail. Jason stepped towards him, his voice desperate. We won't get caught. You know the system better than anyone. SAP, signatures, access, you can do it cleanly. Michael won't check every record. No one will. Richard looked at him, his fingers gripping the back of the chair. He nodded slowly, his voice grim. Okay, I'll handle the records. We'll fix the signatures in SAP, shift the blame to Michael. But it has to be perfect, Jason. No errors. Jason exhaled, his shoulders slumping. Thanks, Dad. I knew you wouldn't leave me. Richard raised his hand, his voice growing harsher. Don't thank me. It's not for you. It's for the company. For the family. But if you do something like that again, I won't bail you out. Jason nodded, his face pale. Got it. I won't let you down again. Richard waved his hand, pointing towards the door. Go away. Bring me everything you have on these translations tomorrow morning. I'll start working on the notes. Jason stood up, his legs shaking. He walked out, closing the door. Richard was left alone, looking out over the city. His face was still, but there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. He sat down at his desk, opened his laptop, and logged into the corporate SAP system. Wilson Construction's 42ND floor office in the Chicago Loop was buzzing with morning activity. Employees were typing reports, phones were ringing, and printers were whirring. Michael Wilson, 35, stood at his desk, discussing the Lincoln Park schedule with a foreman. His dark suit was slightly rumpled, and his face looked tired from the previous day's argument with Jason. He was waiting for his brother to send him the Apex Holdings paperwork, but he hadn't received an answer. The office door slammed open. 5 FBI agents in dark suits rushed in, badges gleaming on their belts. The one in his 40s, with short gray hair and a stern look, was in the lead. His voice echoed through the office. Michael Wilson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Remain where you are. Michael froze, his folder of planes falling from his hands. The employees fell silent, their eyes widening. The foreman stepped back, muttering something unintelligible. What's going on? Michael asked, his voice shaking. What's wrong? The agent came closer, holding the order in his hand. Michael Wilson, you're under arrest for money laundering. We have a warrant. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Michael opened his mouth, but the word stuck. His heart began to pound. Money laundering. This is a mistake. I did nothing. The agent didn't answer, pulling out handcuffs. The second agent, a woman with short dark hair, began reading the rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to a lawyer. Michael barely listened, his eyes darting around the office. Employees were whispering. Some were getting up from their desks to get a better look. Linda Carter, the CFO, emerged from her office, her face pale. "What's going on?" she shouted. "Why are you taking him away?" "Ma'am, step aside," the second agent said, raising his hand. "This is a federal investigation." Michael turned, his hands shaking as the agent snapped the handcuffs into place. "Call my lawyer, Linda," he said, his voice hoarse. "This is a mistake. I didn't sign any transfers." Linda nodded, her eyes full of concern. "I'll call Michael. Hold on." The agents led Michael toward the exit. He spotted Jason standing by the door to his office. His younger brother, 30, was pale, his tie hanging askew. Their eyes met, but Jason quickly looked away, staring at the floor. "Jason," Michael shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "Tell them. You know I didn't do it." Jason didn't answer, retreating into his office and closing the door. Michael gritted his teeth, his face flushed. The agents pushed him toward the elevator, their hands firmly on his shoulders. In the elevator, Michael tried to speak, his voice desperate. "You are mistaken. Check the records. I did not transfer any money. It was not me." "You'll tell us that when you're questioned," the lead agent said, his tone even. "We have evidence. Signatures, emails, wire transfers totaling $2 million. "What signatures?" Michael raised his voice. "I didn't sign anything. It was someone else." The agent looked at him but said nothing. The elevator opened and Michael was escorted out through the lobby of the building. Black FBI subs were parked outside, their lights flashing. People stopped to film the scene on their phones. Michael was shoved into the back seat and the door slammed shut. Meanwhile, at the Wilsons' Lakeview mansion, Emma, 33, sat in the living room, leafing through a magazine. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her eyes were roving absently over the pages. Beside her, Elizabeth, 58, was drinking tea, her face pale. Emma's phone rang, and she answered, her voice light. "Linda, what happened?" Her smile disappeared as Linda spoke. Emma jumped up, her hand pressing the phone to her ear. "What do you mean arrested? FBI? For what?" Elizabeth put down her cup, her eyes widening. "Emma, what's going on?" Emma raised her hand, her voice shaking. "Money laundering? It's impossible. Linda, Michael would never." "Where is he now?" She listened, her face turning pale. "Okay, we're going. Call a lawyer. Right now." Emma threw the phone on the couch, her hands shaking. Michael was arrested. By the FBI, right in his office. They say he was laundering money. Elizabeth gasped, her hand pressing to her chest. "Laundering money? Michael? This is a mistake. He couldn't do that." Emma grabbed her bag, her voice sharp. "I don't know what's going on, but we're going to the office. Now." Elizabeth stood up, her face frightened. "I'll call Richard. He needs to know." Emma nodded, her eyes filling with tears. How could this happen? Michael, he was always careful. Elizabeth hugged her, her voice trembling. "Calm down, Emma. We'll figure it out. This is a mistake. It must be." But her words sounded uncertain. They hurried to the car, their hearts pounding with fear. The Wilson construction office was in chaos. Employees were gathered in a conference room, whispering. Linda stood by the window, talking on the phone with her lawyer. "Yes, it's urgent," she said. "Michael was picked up on money laundering charges. We need all the documents on the transfers to Apex Holdings. Now." Jason sat in his office, his door closed. He stared at his phone, his fingers shaking. The message from Richard read, "It's done. Keep quiet." Jason swallowed, his face pale. He could hear his staff whispering about Michael, and he felt guilt tightening in his chest. But he didn't go out. He couldn't. Richard walked into the office an hour later, his face stern. He gathered the executives in his office, his voice firm. Michael was arrested on suspicion of money laundering. We are cooperating with the authorities. No one is talking to the press. Understood? Linda looked at him, her voice sharp. Richard, this is a mistake. Michael couldn't have done this. I checked the transfers. They went through Jason. Richard raised his hand, his gaze cold. We'll figure it out, Linda. Let the FBI do their job. Linda gritted her teeth, but said nothing. Richard turned to Jason, who had entered last, his eyes avoiding theirs. Jason, stay. The rest of you, get to work. When the door closed, Richard looked at Jason. His voice was quiet. Everything is going according to plan. Keep yourself in hand. Jason nodded, his throat tightening. Yes, Dad. I'll try. Richard turned away, his face unmoving. But inside, he felt something breaking. He had made a choice. The courtroom at the Northern Illinois Federal Courthouse in Chicago was filled with a buzz of conversation. The wooden benches creaked as spectators and reporters took their seats. Michael Wilson, 35, sat at the defense table, his dark suit neatly pressed but his face drawn. Next to him, his defense attorney, David Crow, 50, leafed through a folder of documents, his glasses glinting in the light. Across the hall, the prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair, was sorting through printouts of evidence. In the front row sat Emma, 33, her eyes watering, and Elizabeth, 58, her expression tense. Richard, 60, sat nearby, his eyes fixed. The judge, an elderly man with gray hair, banged his gavel for silence. The case is United States v. Michael Wilson, charged with money laundering. Prosecutor, your opening statement. The prosecutor stood up, her voice clear. Your Honor, gentlemen of the jury, Michael Wilson, the coup of Wilson Construction, used his position to launder $2 million through fictitious contracts with a company called Apex Holdings. We will present evidence, wire transfers signed by the defendant, emails confirming his actions, and suspicious transaction reports. This is a case of greed and deception. Michael clenched his fists under the table, his voice quiet but firm. I didn't do it, David. It's a lie. David placed his hand on his shoulder, whispering. Calm down, Michael. We'll figure it out. Let me work. The prosecutor approached the jury holding a printout. Here are payment orders for 3 transfers of $666,000 each, signed by Michael Wilson in the SAP system. This is not a mistake. This is deliberate fraud. Michael shook his head, his voice growing louder. I didn't sign these translations. This is a fake. The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Wilson, speak through your lawyer. David stood up, his voice calm. Your Honor, the defense claims that my client is innocent. These signatures could have been forged. We demand an examination of the SAP system and access to the original data. The prosecutor smiled, her tone confident. The defense had 3 months to check. Your experts found no errors in the records. Here's more evidence. Emails from Michael Wilson sent to Apex Holdings with transfer instructions. She turned on the projector, showing a screen of letters. From michael.wilson@wilsonconstruction.com. Michael jumped up, his voice shaking. I didn't send these letters. Check my computer. It's someone else. David tugged at his sleeve, whispering. Sit down, Michael. You're making things worse. In the front row, Emma covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Elizabeth hugged her, but her own eyes were full of fear. Richard sat still, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecutor continued, her voice becoming harsher. These emails were sent from a corporate server. The SAP signatures were verified by the bank's audit. Michael Wilson, as coup, had access and motive. He transferred $2 million to the Cayman Islands, violating the Bank Secrecy Act and Sarbanes-Oxley. David stood up, his voice firm. Your Honor, my client had no motive. He did not gain anything personally. We demand to question the financial manager, Jason Wilson, who also had access to SAP. The prosecutor objected, her tone sharp. Jason Wilson testified. He did not sign the transfers. All evidence points to the defendant. Michael turned to David, his voice desperate. Jason is lying. He knew about Apex. I told you, he promised documents. The judge banged his gavel. Mr. Wilson, one more violation, and I will remove you from the courtroom. David nodded, whispering to Michael. We'll call Jason later, but right now the evidence is against us. It looks ironclad. The trial lasted 3 hours. The prosecutor called a witness, a bank auditor, who confirmed the existence of suspicious activity reports for the transfers. The defense called in its specialist, but he was unable to prove the forgery of the emails due to limited access to the server. The jury listened, their faces impassive. When the judge called a break, Michael turned to Emma, his voice quiet. Emma, you believe me, right? I didn't do it. Emma looked up, her face tear-stained. I don't know, Michael. These letters, they're from you. Michael gritted his teeth, his voice wavering. They are not from me. Someone set me up. Please believe me. Emma turned away, her hands shaking. Elizabeth squeezed her shoulder, whispering, Emma, he couldn't do this. We will find the truth. Richard stood up, his voice even. Come on, Elizabeth. We need to talk to a lawyer. Michael watched them go, his heart sinking. He noticed Jason was missing. His brother hadn't come. That cut deeper than the evidence. 2 days later, the judge delivered his verdict. The courtroom was packed. Journalists recorded every word. Michael stood, his hands cuffed, his face pale. The judge looked at him, his voice stern. Michael Wilson, you have been convicted of money laundering under 18 Section 1956. Based on the $2 million involved and your role in the company, the court sentences you to 7 years in a medium-security federal prison. Your sentence is effective immediately. Michael closed his eyes, his legs buckling. David put his hand on his shoulder, whispering, We'll appeal. Hang in there. Emma burst into tears in the front row, her face buried in a handkerchief. Michael turned to her, his voice hoarse. Emma, come here. Please. Emma looked up but remained where she was, her body shaking. She shook her head, avoiding his gaze. Elizabeth hugged her, her own eyes full of tears. Michael, we are with you. We will find a way. Richard stood silent, his face unmoving, turning away as the bailiffs approached Michael. The bailiffs took Michael by the elbows, leading him out of the room. He glanced back at Emma, his voice barely audible. I'm innocent, Emma. Remember that. Emma didn't answer, her tears dripping down her dress. The bailiffs escorted Michael out the side door, and the room erupted in a roar of voices. Journalists rushed to the exit, preparing headlines. Wilson Construction Co. convicted of laundering $2 million. Elizabeth looked at Richard, her voice shaking. Richard, this is wrong. Michael couldn't do this. We have to do something. Richard nodded, his voice even. We will, Elizabeth. Let the lawyers work. FCI Beckley, a medium-security federal prison in West Virginia, smelled of bleach and sweat. Michael Wilson, 35, walked down the hallway of his dorm, his orange uniform hanging like a sack, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. It had been 3 months since a judge sentenced him to 7 years for laundering money he had never touched. His cell, a narrow room with a bunk bed, a metal toilet, and a small table, was his reality. Through a barred window, he could see a yard with a basketball court, surrounded by a fence topped with barbed wire. Prison wasn't the hell of the movies, with no gangs or stabbings, but the silence, punctuated by the guards' footsteps and the hum of voices, was oppressive. Michael felt cut off from the world. Emma didn't answer the phone, Jason was gone, and his mother, Elizabeth, called once a month, her voice trembling with tears. The betrayal of the trial, of his family, of his brother was more stinging than the handcuffs on the day of his arrest. Michael sat in the dining room, holding a plastic tray of gray potatoes and a chicken cutlet. Across from him sat his cellmate, Carlos Mendez, 42, a convicted tax fraud prisoner. Carlos, a short man with a short beard and calm eyes, chewed bread and looked at Michael. You're silent again, Carlos said, taking a sip of water. 3 months, and you're still like a ghost. Eat, or you'll get thinner. Michael poked his fork into the potato, his voice muffled. Not hungry, it's all pointless. Carlos narrowed his eyes, his tone becoming firmer. Pointless. You're in prison, brother, not on vacation. If you don't eat, work, or live, you'll break. I've seen some like that. After a year, they're like zombies. Michael looked up, his voice shaking. What should I do? I shouldn't be here. I was set up. My brother. He knew about that money. Carlos put down his fork, his gaze serious. Maybe they did set you up. But you're here, and he's there. Do you want to prove the truth? Survive first. Prison eats the weak. Michael clutched the tray, his face tense. What? I wash floors for 15 cents an hour. My wife doesn't answer. I'm nobody. Carlos chuckled, his voice becoming harsher. Nobody? You're Michael Wilson, the former boss, right? I've been here 3 years. Lost my family, my business. But I get up every day. You know why? Because if you give up, that's it. Find a rhythm. Work, exercise, library. Keep your mind busy. Michael was silent, his gaze falling on the cutlet. Carlos stood up, clapping him on the shoulder. Let's go to the gym after dinner. Lift the barbell and you'll feel better. Michael nodded but remained seated. Carlos's words had stung him, but he didn't know how to begin. The days in prison dragged on the same way. Wake up at 6 o'clock, check in, breakfast of oatmeal and coffee that tastes like slop. Michael worked in the laundry room, folding uniforms until his hands were red from the soap. During the day, he went to the library, leafing through federal law books, hoping to figure out how to appeal. But without access to SAP or new evidence, his chances were slim to none. Carlos became his shadow. They would sit in their cell at night, and Carlos would share stories how he got caught evading taxes, how his kids stopped calling. One day, after work, they were sitting on their bunks, and Michael asked, his voice quiet, how did you not break down? Knowing that your family is there, and you are here? Carlos looked at the wall, his voice even. I broke down. For the first 6 months, I cried at night like a child. But then I realized, either you live or you die inside. I chose to live. I go to the gym, I read, I work. It keeps me going. Michael nodded, his gaze heavy. I want to get out, to prove that I'm innocent. But without evidence, I'm stuck. Carlos turned to him, his tone becoming harsher. Stuck. You're in jail, not in a coffin. Go to the library, get appeal forms. Find a lawyer who will dig deeper. But don't sit there and say that everything is lost. You're not a weakling, you're stronger than you think. Michael was silent, but Carlos's words had struck a chord with him. The next day, he picked up an appeal form from the library and began reading the instructions, even though he didn't know where to begin. It was a step forward. A month later, Michael called Elizabeth, using his 15 minutes. He stood at a payphone in the hallway, clutching the receiver. Mom, it's me. How are you? Elizabeth answered, her voice shaking. Michael, son, I'm holding up. My lawyer and I are working on the appeal. How are you? Michael swallowed, his voice hoarse. I live. I work, I read. Mom, what about Emma? Does she talk about me? Elizabeth paused, her voice growing quieter. She's having a hard time, Michael. She rarely calls. Give her time. Michael clutched the phone, his eyes growing moist. She doesn't pick up. I called 3 times. Nothing. Elizabeth sighed, her voice full of pain. I'll talk to her. Hang in there, son. I believe in you. Michael nodded, although she couldn't see. Thank you, Mom. I won't give up. He hung up, his throat tight. Carlos, standing nearby, noticed his face. Not answering, he asked, his tone even. Michael shook his head, his voice muffled. No, nobody answers. Carlos slapped him on the back. Then do what you can. Come on, there's a punching bag in the gym. Let off some steam. Michael nodded, his face hardening. Okay, let's go. FCI Beckley, a medium-security federal prison in West Virginia, was humming with its morning routine. Inmates in orange uniforms were heading to work, guards were checking cells. Michael Wilson, 35, sat at a desk in the library, leafing through a dog-eared book on federal law. His dark hair had grown out, his face drawn from 6 months behind bars. 7 years for money laundering, a crime he didn't commit, still burned inside. Emma, his wife, wasn't answering her phone, and even his mother, Elizabeth, was calling less frequently, busy looking for an attorney for her appeal. The warden, a strong man of about 40, entered the library holding an envelope. "Wilson, post office," he said, throwing the envelope on the table. "Legal. You'll sign it in my office." Michael frowned as he closed the book. "Legal? From whom?" The warden shrugged, his voice even. "I don't know. Some lawyer from Chicago. Let's go." Michael took the envelope, his fingers tightening around the thick paper. He followed the guard into a small office next to the guard station. There he sat at a metal desk, the guard standing by the door. Michael tore open the envelope, removing a stack of documents. The title read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage." His heart stopped. "Is this a scam?" he muttered, his voice shaking. The warden nodded, his tone businesslike. "Looks like it. Read it, sign it if you agree. I will testify." Michael flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the text. Emma Wilson, his wife, was filing for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The filing said she couldn't wait for him to serve 7 years in prison and wanted to move on. Emma's signature, neat and familiar, cut him like a knife. The papers required his consent for a streamlined divorce out of court. Michael clutched the papers, his hands shaking. She didn't even talk to me. She didn't call." The warden looked at him, his voice softening. "It happens, man. Sign it and it'll all be over faster. Or hire a lawyer if you want to argue." Michael shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Who should I argue with? She's already decided." He picked up the pen, his fingers hovering over the signature line. He remembered Emma in court, her tear-stained eyes, her refusal to come over. She wouldn't answer when he called, wouldn't show up for visits. But divorce? It was the end of everything he'd tried to save. He swallowed, his throat tightening, and signed. The warden signed, took the papers, and left. Michael remained seated, staring at the empty table. His chest tightened as if the air had disappeared. He closed his eyes, but tears still stung his eyelids. That evening, Michael returned to his cell, his steps heavy. Carlos Mendez, his cellmate, 42, was lying on the top bunk, reading a tattered book. He noticed Michael's face and sat up, his voice calm. "What happened, brother? It's like you saw a ghost." Michael collapsed onto the bottom bunk, his voice muffled. "Emma filed for divorce. They sent the papers. I signed." Carlos whistled, his eyebrows rising. "Damn. That's harsh. Did she even explain why?" Michael shook his head, his eyes staring at the wall. "She wrote that she couldn't wait 7 years. She didn't want to be tied down. She didn't call. She didn't come. That's it." Carlos jumped off the bed and sat down opposite. "Look, it hurts, I know. My wife left me a year after my due date. But you can't let that break you." Michael clenched his fists, his voice breaking. "Break? Carlos, she was everything. I thought she believed me, that I was innocent. And now, I'm nobody." Carlos leaned closer, his tone becoming harsher. "You're not nobody. You're Michael Wilson, and you're here because someone set you up. She left, her choice, but you have to live for yourself." Michael looked at him, his eyes were red. "For what? I have nothing left. No wife, no home, no freedom." Carlos slapped the table, his voice growing louder. "For the sake of truth, brother." Michael was silent, his breathing heavy. He nodded, his voice quieter. "I tried calling her. For months. She doesn't answer. Now I understand why." Carlos shook his head, his tone softening. "Then let go. Focus on yourself. Tomorrow we'll go to the library, get appeal forms. Let's start small." Michael nodded, his face hardening. "Okay, I'll try." Carlos stood up, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's it. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow is a new day." The next day, Michael walked to the library, his steps slow but determined. He picked up the appeal form and sat at the desk, staring at the blank lines. His mind was spinning. Forged signatures, letters, Jason, Richard. Someone had set him up, and Emma had turned away, letting him know he was alone. It stung, but somewhere inside, the pain turned to anger. He began talking to Carlos more often, asking about prison lawyers and appeals. Carlos, who knew the system, told him how to request a new lawyer through the prison administration. Michael filled out the form, his hand shaking, but he wrote, "I am innocent. My signatures are forged." That was the first step. A week later, he called Elizabeth from a payphone in the hallway. His voice was quiet. "Mom, it's me. Emma filed for divorce." I signed. Elizabeth gasped, her voice shaking. "Oh, Michael, how could she? I talked to her, but she changed." Michael clutched the phone, his voice hoarse. "She doesn't believe me. No one does, except you. But I won't give up, Mom. I'll find the truth." Elizabeth sobbed, her voice full of determination. "Me too, son. We'll find a lawyer, we'll appeal. Hang in there." Michael nodded, his eyes growing moist. "Thank you, Mom. I'm holding up." He hung up, his chest tightening. Emma was lost, but the pain that had been tearing through him was beginning to become a purpose. He returned to his cell, opened the appeal form, and began writing again. Carlos, noticing, nodded. "This is my guy. Move forward." The office of Tom Harris, a private investigator, was in an old building in Chicago's West Loop. The room was cramped, with a worn wooden desk covered in folders and a whiteboard covered with notes and photographs. Tom, 36, a former military man with short dark hair and a scar over his eyebrow, sat at the desk, reviewing paperwork. His leather jacket hung over the back of a chair, and a cup of black coffee sat on the table. Across from him sat Elizabeth Wilson, 58, her gray hair pulled back into a neat bun, but her face drawn. She held her purse, her fingers fiddling nervously with the strap. Tom put the folder down, his voice calm. "Elizabeth, thank you for coming. I know it's hard for you. Tell me what's new." Elizabeth swallowed, her voice shaking. "Michael, he signed the divorce papers. Emma left him, Tom, and now I found out she's pregnant. Jason's." Tom frowned, his eyebrows drawing together. "From Jason? Damn, that's low, like Michael." Elizabeth shook her head, her eyes growing moist. "He's broken. I spoke to him on the phone. He's trying to hold on, but I heard his voice. He's losing everything. Tom, I don't believe he's guilty. Michael couldn't have been laundering money." Tom nodded, his gaze becoming more serious. "I don't believe it either. Michael and I have been friends since college. He's an honest guy. But the evidence against him, the signatures, the letters looks ironclad. Someone did a good job." Elizabeth leaned closer, her voice firmer. "Then find who. I'll pay whatever it takes. I want my son to come home." Tom leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the table. "Okay, I'll start digging, but I need to know everything. What do you think about Jason? He was in the company's finances. If someone set up Michael, he could be in on it." Elizabeth clutched her purse, her face tense. "Jason, he changed. After the trial, he started avoiding me. And now this thing with Emma. I don't want to believe that he's capable of this, but I don't know." Tom nodded, his voice even. "Got it. I'll start with the finances. The $2 million transfers that were mentioned in court went through Apex Holdings. I'll check their tracks, but I'll need access to the bank records or the company's system." Elizabeth frowned, her voice worried. "How will you do that? Richard controls the company. He won't give you anything." Tom smiled, his tone confident. "I have friends. If there are discrepancies, I will find them. But it will take time." Elizabeth nodded, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Do what you have to do, Tom. I trust you. Just find the truth." Tom stood up, holding out his hand. "Agreed. I'll start today. Keep me posted if anything comes up." Elizabeth shook his hand, her voice quiet. "Thank you, Tom. You're our only chance." She left, leaving a check for $5,000 on the table. Tom looked at it, Then at the notepad, he pinned up a photo of Michael from the courtroom and wrote next to it, Apex Holdings, signatures. Jason, that was the beginning. A week later, Tom was sitting in a cafe across from the bank where Wilson Construction kept accounts. His informant, Dan, 45, a bank clerk with a bald head and a nervous smile, handed him a flash drive. They spoke quietly so no one would overhear. Here are the transaction records for the last year, Dan said, his voice low. I took a risk, Tom. If I get caught, I'm out of work. Tom nodded, his gaze firm. No one will know. What did you find? Dan swallowed, his fingers fiddling with the napkin. Transfers to Apex Holdings 3 for $666K, signed by Michael in SAP. But I dug deeper. The signature metadata is strange. The timestamps don't match Michael's other transactions. It's like someone added them later. Tom frowned, his voice becoming sharper. Fake? Can you prove it? Dan shook his head, his eyes darting around. Not without access to the company's servers. But I gave you everything I could. Check it out yourself. Tom put the flash drive in his pocket, his tone grateful. Thanks, Dan. I owe you. Dan stood up, his voice nervous. Don't call me for a month, and be careful. Tom nodded as Dan left. He returned to the office, plugged the flash drive into his laptop, and began examining the files. The records confirmed Dan's words. Michael's signatures on the Apex transfers had discrepancies in the metadata. The authorization codes were different from his usual transactions. It was a hint of forgery, but without access to SAP, it was difficult to prove. Tom called Elizabeth that night, his voice excited. He was sitting in his office, his laptop screen glowing. Elizabeth, I found something. Bank records for Apex Holdings. Michael's signatures look fake. Metadata doesn't match. Elizabeth gasped, her voice shaking. Fake? Does that mean he's innocent? Can we get him out? Tom shook his head, although she couldn't see. Not so fast. This is just the beginning. I need access to the company system to compare data. But Richard or Jason won't give me that. Elizabeth paused, her voice growing quieter. I can talk to Richard. But he's protecting Jason. I don't know how far he'll go. Tom nodded, his tone becoming firmer. Then I'll try another way. I have a contact in Wilson Construction's department. If he gets the SAP logs, we can prove the forgery. Elizabeth swallowed, her voice full of hope. Do what you have to do, Tom. I believe in you. Tom hung up, his eyes returning to the screen. He added a new note to the board. SAP, logs, Jason or Richard. It was a slim hope, but it was there. He wouldn't let Michael down. The Wilsons' mansion in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood was quiet despite its opulence. The living room, with its white sofas and crystal chandelier, was as cold as the mood of Elizabeth Wilson, 58. She sat at the dining room table, her gray hair pulled back into a bun, her face pale with fatigue. In front of her was a medical report. Lung cancer, stage Roman 4, prognosis less than a year. Across from her sat Tom Harris, 36, a private investigator, his leather jacket slung over a chair, a folder of printouts on the table. His dark eyes were serious, but his voice was calm. Elizabeth clasped her hands, her voice shaking. Tom, you said you found something important. Tell me. I need to know. Tom opened the folder, taking out a printout of the SAP logs. I got access to the company's system through a contact in it. Transaction logs for Apex Holdings. Michael's signatures are forged. Metadata shows they were added later from another account. The trail leads to Jason. Elizabeth gasped, her hand pressing to her chest. Still Jason. Tom nodded, his voice firm. 90%. The account from which the signatures were forged belongs to Jason. He had access to SAP and knew how to bypass checks. Plus the bank records, the transfers to the Caymans match his activity, not Michael's. Elizabeth closed her eyes, her face contorted in pain. Jason. How could he? Set up his brother. I raised them together, Tom. They're my family. Tom leaned closer, his tone softening. I know it's hard, but the evidence doesn't lie. Jason manipulated the finances. If we give this to the FBI, they'll start a new investigation. Michael could get out. Elizabeth opened her eyes, her voice hoarse. And Jason, what will happen to him? Tom shrugged, his gaze honest. Money laundering, tampering with evidence, up to 7 years in prison. Maybe less if he confesses, but he's guilty, Elizabeth. You have to choose. Elizabeth stood up, her steps unsteady. She walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. Choose between my sons. Michael is suffering for something he didn't do. But Jason, he's my son. I can't just destroy him. Tom stood up, his voice becoming firmer. I understand, but Michael is in prison because of Jason. You said to yourself that you wanted the truth. This is it. If we don't do anything, Michael will serve 7 years. Elizabeth turned, her eyes filling with tears. I know, but it tears me apart. Jason was my baby. He made a mistake, but he's not a villain. Maybe there's another way. Tom shook his head, his tone direct. The other way is to leave everything as is. Michael will stay in prison, and Jason will live knowing that he framed his brother. Can you live with that? Elizabeth clenched her fists, her voice shaking. No, I can't. Michael is innocent. I have to fix this, even if it breaks my heart. She returned to the table, her face determined. Hire a lawyer, the best one you can find. I want this evidence to reach the FBI. Michael needs to get out. Tom nodded, his voice confident. Good. I have a contact, Catherine Wells, a federal lawyer. She knows how to submit new evidence for the appeal. I'll give it to her tomorrow. Elizabeth swallowed, her voice quiet. Thank you, Tom. How much will it cost? Tom waved his hand, his tone warm. Don't think about it. You've already paid enough. I'll do it for Michael. Elizabeth forced a smile, her eyes shining. You're a good friend, Tom. Michael is lucky to have you with him. Tom gathered up the folder, his voice becoming businesslike. I'll start today. Keep me informed if Richard or Jason suspect anything. Elizabeth nodded, walking him to the door. When he left, she returned to the desk, looking at the medical report. Her time was running out, and she knew she had to leave everything in order. The next day, Elizabeth sat in the office of her lawyer, Margaret Davis, 50, with short gray hair and a sharp suit. The office in downtown Chicago was lined with bookcases and folders of documents on the desk. Elizabeth held a copy of her will, her voice weak but determined. Margaret, I want to change my will, she said. My cancer, it's getting worse. I don't have much time. Margaret nodded, her voice professional. I understand, Elizabeth. What do you want to do? Elizabeth clenched her hands, her eyes hard. I'm setting up a trust. All my assets, my company shares, my house, my savings should go to Michael. He's innocent, and I want him protected. Margaret wrote it down, her eyebrows raised. And Jason, he's your son. Do you want to expel him? Elizabeth swallowed, her voice wavering. Yes. Margaret nodded, her voice calm. Okay, I'll prepare the trust documents. Michael will be the beneficiary, and we will protect the assets from any claims. It will take a week. Elizabeth looked at her, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you, Margaret. I need to make sure Michael gets everything. He deserves a chance to start over. Margaret placed her hand on hers, her voice softening. You're doing the right thing, Elizabeth. I'll take care of it. The Northern Illinois federal courtroom in Chicago was tense. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of reporters and spectators. Michael Wilson, 39, sat at the defense table, his orange prison uniform replaced by a rumpled gray suit issued by his lawyer. His face was drawn, his dark hair cropped, but his eyes were bright with a mixture of hope and weariness. Beside him sat Catherine Wells, 45, a federal defense attorney, her dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, a folder of papers in front of her. In the front row sat Elizabeth Wilson, 62, her face pale, her hands shaking with emotion. The prosecutor, a balding man in his 50s with a stern look, shuffled through his notes. The judge, a woman with short gray hair, rapped her gavel. The case is United States v. Michael Wilson. Motion for reconsideration based on new evidence. Miss Wells, you have the floor." Catherine stood up, her voice clear. "Your Honor, jury, the defense presents new evidence that proves Michael Wilson's innocence. An independent analyst's examination of the SAP system shows that signatures on $2 million in transfers to Apex Holdings were forged. The metadata points to an account belonging to Jason Wilson, the company's financial manager." The prosecutor jumped up, his voice sharp. "I object. This data was not presented at the first trial. Where did it come from anyway?" Catherine turned to face him, her tone firm. "The data was obtained through a private investigation initiated by the Wilson family. We also present bank records confirming that Jason Wilson, not my client, initiated the transfers. This complies with Federal Rules of Evidence, Rule 33. The judge nodded, her voice calm. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Miss Wells." Michael looked at Catherine, his heart pounding. He whispered, his voice hoarse, "Is it true? Will we prove it?" Catherine nodded, whispering, "We're close, Michael. Trust me." She turned on the projector, showing a screen with SAP logs. "Here's the transaction metadata. Michael Wilson's signatures were added through Jason Wilson's account, with timestamps that don't match his normal activity. This is a forgery, Your Honor. My client was wrongfully convicted." Elizabeth, in the front row, clasped her hands, her eyes shining with tears. She whispered to herself, "Please let it work." The prosecutor stood up, his voice skeptical. "This is speculation. The defense has no direct evidence that Jason Wilson forged the signatures. Where is his testimony?" Catherine smiled, her voice becoming harsher. "We call a witness, Dan Clark, a former employee of the bank that serviced Wilson Construction. He will confirm the discrepancies in the records." Dan, 45, walked into the courtroom, his bald head glinting under the lights. He took the witness stand, his voice nervous. "I checked the transfers to Apex Holdings. The signature metadata did not match Michael Wilson's transactions. They were added later through another account." The judge looked at him, her voice stern. "Do you understand that your testimony has legal force?" Dan nodded, his hands shaking. "Yes, Your Honor. I am telling the truth." The trial lasted 2 hours. Catherine presented additional bank records showing that Jason had initiated the transfers. The prosecutor tried to argue, but his arguments weakened. Finally, the judge banged her gavel. "The court finds the new evidence compelling. Michael Wilson's conviction is overturned. He is released immediately." Michael closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping. Catherine squeezed his hand, her voice warm. "You're free, Michael." Elizabeth burst into tears, her hands clasped to her face. She stood up, her voice shaking. "Thank you, Catherine. Thank you." Michael turned to face her, his eyes wet. "Mom, you did it. I knew you wouldn't give up." The bailiffs removed his handcuffs, and he hugged Elizabeth, his body shaking. But the joy was bittersweet. 4 years in prison, divorce, betrayal, none of it had gone away. That same day, at the Wilson Construction office, the FBI burst through the glass doors. Jason Wilson, 34, sat at his desk, his face pale as agents in dark jackets walked in. The lead agent, a woman with short hair, held a warrant. "Jason Wilson, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and tampering with evidence," she said, her voice sharp. "Put your hands behind your back." Jason jumped up, his voice breaking. "This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. Call my father." The agent snapped the handcuffs shut, her tone cold. "Your father has been arrested too. Talk to a lawyer." Meanwhile, in a corner office, Richard Wilson, 64, stood in front of his desk as agents handcuffed him, his gray hair disheveled, his face set in stone. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low. "It was a mistake. I was protecting the company." The agent shook his head, his voice firm. "Say that in court, Mr. Wilson." Jason and Richard were escorted out of the office in front of the staff. Linda Carter, the CFO, watched from her office, her face grim. She knew the truth was out, but the price was high. Michael walked out of the courthouse, his eyes squinting in the bright light. Elizabeth held his hand, her voice weak. "You're home, son. Everything will be fine now. Michael shook his head, his voice muffled. Home? I don't have a home, Mom. Emma's gone, the company's ruined, my reputation is in tatters. What should I do? Elizabeth squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. You will start again. I am with you. We will cope. Tom Harris waited by the car, his face lit up with a smile. Glad to see you free, brother. Sorry it took so long. Michael hugged him, his voice hoarse. Thank you, Tom. The hospice in suburban Chicago was quiet, smelling of medicine and flowers. Elizabeth Wilson's room, 62, was small, with a bed by a window overlooking a snow-covered garden. Elizabeth lay under a blanket, her face pale, her gray hair falling in thin strands onto the pillow. The lung cancer she had been diagnosed with a year earlier had sapped her strength, leaving her with only a weak breath. Michael Wilson, 39, sat by the bed, holding her hand. His gray sweater was wrinkled, his eyes red from crying. He had been free for just 2 weeks, after a review of his case, but the joy of freedom was tempered by her condition. Elizabeth opened her eyes, her voice barely audible. Michael, you're here. Michael squeezed her hand, his voice shaking. I'm here, Mom. I'm not leaving. She smiled weakly, her eyes shining. I'm so proud of you. You stood firm. Forgive me. For everything. Michael shook his head, his voice hoarse. Don't say that. You saved me. You and Tom found the truth. Elizabeth coughed, her breathing heavy. I didn't protect you. Before. Jason. I didn't see what he became. Michael swallowed, his eyes watering. It's not your fault, Mom. You did everything you could. She squeezed his hand, her voice becoming firmer. Look, I've arranged everything. The company, the house. Everything is yours. Margaret. She knows. Michael frowned, his voice quiet. What do you mean? Which Margaret? Elizabeth closed her eyes, her voice weakening. My lawyer. Trust. For you. Letter. On my desk. Read it. Michael nodded, his throat tightening. Okay, Mom. Rest. I'll be here. She smiled, her breathing slowing. An hour later, she died, her hand still in his. Michael sat motionless, tears streaming down his cheeks. He had lost his mother, the last link to the family that had not betrayed him. 3 days later, Michael stood in the living room of the Wilson mansion in Lakeview. Elizabeth's funeral had been quiet, with only he, Tom Harris, and a few family friends present. Jason and Richard, who were on federal trial, were not allowed to attend. Michael felt empty, but he knew he had to honor her last wishes. He opened her desk drawer, finding a sealed envelope addressed to Michael. He sat down on the sofa, opened the envelope, and began to read. Elizabeth's handwriting was shaky but clear. My dear Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Forgive me for my weakness. I didn't protect you from Jason and Richard when I could have. I loved them both, but I couldn't see the truth. You've always been honest, and I'm proud to have you as my son. I set up a trust so that everything the company, the house, the savings goes to you. Margaret Davis, my lawyer, knows the details. Use it to start over. Find happiness, Michael. I'll always be with you. With love, Mom. Michael lowered the letter, his hands shaking. He closed his eyes, tears stinging his eyelids again. She had given him a chance, but without her, he felt lost. The next day, Michael met with Margaret Davis, Elizabeth's attorney, in her office in downtown Chicago. Margaret, 50, with short gray hair, sat at her desk with the trust documents in front of her. Her voice was professional but warm. Michael, my condolences, she said, handing over the folder. Elizabeth was a strong woman. She wanted you to be protected. Michael nodded, his voice muffled. She talked about trust. What does that mean? Margaret opened the folder, her tone clear. Elizabeth created a revocable living trust. All of her assets, 60% of Wilson Construction, her Lakeview mansion, her savings of about $3 million are transferred to you. The trust protects them from claims, including Jason and Richard, while they are under investigation. Michael frowned, his voice quiet. The company? After the scandal, is it worth anything at all? Margaret nodded, her gaze serious. The scandal has damaged the reputation, and there is a risk of fines for violating Sarbanes-Oxley. But the company has contracts and assets. If you find a new manager, you can restore it. Michael clutched the folder, his face tense. What about Jason and Richard? Can they challenge it? Margaret shook her head, her voice firm. No. Elizabeth cut them out of the trust. They're under arrest for fraud and tampering with evidence. Court costs and fines will leave them with nothing. Michael nodded, his voice hoarse. She thought about everything, even when she was dying. Margaret placed her hand on his palm, her voice softening. She loved you, Michael. She wanted you to start over. Michael stood up, his eyes blank. Thank you, Margaret. I'll figure it out. He walked away, holding the folder like a life preserver. The company and the money were his, but without Elizabeth, they felt like a heavy burden. That evening, Michael sat in the Wilson construction office, now empty without Richard and Jason. He looked out the picture window at the city, his mind spinning. Tom Harris walked in, his leather jacket creaking. He sat across from him, his voice warm. "How are you, brother?" Tom asked. "Just don't lie." Michael shook his head, his voice muffled. "I don't know, Tom. Mom's dead, Emma's gone, the company's in crisis. I have everything, but I feel like I have nothing." Tom nodded, his gaze serious. "You've lost a lot, but you have a chance. Elizabeth gave it to you. Don't waste it." The Wilson Mansion in Lakeview, Chicago, was now the home of Michael Wilson, 39. He had moved in after Elizabeth died, leaving him everything in a trust. The living room, with its white sofas and crystal chandelier, looked empty, like his life. Michael sat at his desk, going over Wilson construction reports, trying to figure out how to rebuild the company after the scandal. His dark hair had been cut short, but his face still bore the marks of 4 years in prison, the wrinkles, the tired look. A gray sweater and jeans had replaced his business suits, but his posture was straight, rigid. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Michael frowned, expecting Tom Harris, his friend and detective, but through the peephole he saw Emma Davis, 37. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, her makeup free face gaunt. She was holding the hand of Daniel, a 3-year-old boy with dark curls her and Jason's son. Michael clenched his jaw, but opened the door. "Emma," he said, his voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Emma swallowed, her eyes red. "Michael, I need to talk. Please let us in." Michael looked at Daniel, whose large eyes were studying him, and nodded. "Come in, but not for long." They walked into the living room. Emma sat Daniel down on the couch, giving him a toy truck. She turned to Michael, her voice shaking. "I learned that you are innocent. News, Elizabeth. I didn't know, Michael. Forgive me." Michael crossed his arms, his gaze icy. "Forgive me. You left me, Emma. You filed for divorce while I was in prison, and now you come with his child and ask for forgiveness." Emma covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I was in a panic. You were in jail. Your accounts were frozen. I didn't know what to do. Jason, he was there, helping. I made a mistake, Michael. Please give me a chance." Michael shook his head, his voice growing sharper. "Chance? You slept with my brother Emma, gave birth to his son, and left me to rot in a cell. Do you think words will fix that?" Emma sobbed, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I thought you were guilty. The letters, the signatures, they all said it was you. I was alone. Michael, like this if you think there should be no forgiveness for such betrayal. And subscribe so you don't miss the ending. The worst is yet to come." Michael stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Alone? You had my mother, Tom, but you chose Jason, and now he's in jail for setting me up. Where's your pride, Emma?" Daniel looked at them, his truck stopped. Emma wiped away her tears, her voice weak. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but that's not all I came for. I need help. I can't support Daniel. I have no job, no money. The bank is foreclosing the house." Michael looked at the boy, his face softening for a moment, but his voice remained hard. "Help? You want money? After everything?" Emma shook her head, her eyes full of despair. Not for myself. For him. He's innocent, Michael. He shouldn't have to suffer for my mistakes. Michael was silent, his gaze moving from Emma to Daniel. The boy was Jason's son, but also part of his family. He remembered Elizabeth's letter, her words about a new beginning. He couldn't forgive Emma, but Daniel deserved better than his father. He sat down opposite, his voice becoming businesslike. I'll give you money, $200,000. Enough for a house, for life. But there's a condition. Emma looked up, her voice wary. What condition? Michael looked at Daniel, his gaze hard. You will give me custody of him. Full custody. I will raise him, give him everything Jason wouldn't. You will not interfere. Emma gasped, her face turning pale. Guardianship? Michael, he's my son. I can't. You can, Michael interrupted, his voice cold. You said to yourself that you can't support him. I can. I have a company, a house, and money. He'll be safe, or you'll leave with nothing. Emma closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked at Daniel, who was playing with the truck, not understanding their words. Her voice was barely audible. You will be a good father, better than I am a mother. Michael nodded, his face unreadable. I'll call the lawyer. We'll draw up the papers. You'll get the money when you sign. Emma nodded, her shoulders slumping. Okay, for his sake. She stood up, walked over to Daniel, and kissed him on the forehead. Mommy will be back soon, baby, she whispered, her voice trembling. Michael watched her leave, his heart sinking, but he didn't stop her. When the door closed, he sat down next to Daniel, his voice soft. Hey, buddy, want to see some bigger trucks? Daniel nodded, his eyes lighting up. Michael smiled for the first time in a long time. This was his choice, not for Emma, not for Jason, but for the boy who would be his family. That same night, Michael called Tom Harris from his living room, his voice tired but determined. Tom, it's me. Emma was here. I'm taking custody of her son. Tom whistled, his voice surprised. Seriously, Jason's boy? That's a big step, brother. Michael nodded, his gaze falling on the toy truck. He's not Jason's. He's mine. I won't let him grow up like his father. Tom chuckled, his tone turning warm. You're a good man, Michael. If anything happens, I'm here. Maybe I'll become Uncle Tom. Michael smiled, his voice softening. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. He hung up, looking at Daniel sleeping on the couch. The Wilson Mansion in Lakeview, Chicago, was home to Michael Wilson, 40, and Daniel, a 3-year-old boy he was raising as a son. The living room, once cold, was now littered with toys, plastic trucks, and blocks. Michael, in jeans and a dark shirt, sat on the floor, helping Daniel build a tower. His dark hair was slightly gray, but his eyes glowed with a warmth that had not been there a year ago. 4 years in prison, Emma's betrayal, and Elizabeth's death had left scars, but Daniel and his new goal, rebuilding Wilson Construction, gave him strength. The doorbell interrupted the game. Michael stood up and opened the door. Kate Morgan, 34, a corporate lawyer, stood there. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her gray suit was professional, but her smile was warm. She held a folder of documents. Michael, she said, her voice businesslike, I've brought new contracts. Can we discuss them? Michael nodded, stepping back. Sure, Kate, come in. Daniel, say hello. Daniel ran up, his curls bouncing. Hi, do you like trucks? Kate laughed, her eyes lighting up. I love them, especially the big ones. Will you show me? Daniel nodded, pulling her towards the toys. Michael smiled, his voice soft. He likes guests. Let's go to the office while he's busy. They walked into the office, where Wilson Construction reports lay on the table. Michael sat down, his voice growing serious. What about the contracts? Is the bank still putting pressure on you? Kate opened the folder, her tone confident. Yes, but we managed. I agreed with the bank on debt restructuring. We paid the fines for violating Sarbanes-Oxley $200,000 from the trust. A new contract with the city for bridge repairs has been signed. That's $1 million in your pocket. Michael exhaled, his face relaxing. You saved us, Kate. Without you, the company would have been bankrupt. Kate shook her head, her voice softening. You're pulling it yourself, Michael. I'm just shuffling papers. The new manager you hired is already getting the finances in order. Michael looked at her, his gaze growing warmer. Not just papers. You make me believe that it is possible. Kate smiled, her cheeks turning slightly red. Then keep believing. We're not done yet. Over the next few months, Kate became a part of Michael's life. She would come to the mansion not only with contracts, but also with pizza for Daniel or books for Michael. Their conversations would shift from business to personal about her childhood in Iowa, his dreams before prison. Michael, still wary after Emma's betrayal, began to trust. Kate was direct, strong but kind, and her presence healed him. One evening, they were sitting in the backyard while Daniel played in the sandbox. Michael held a bottle of beer, Kate a glass of wine. The sky was clear, the stars shining over Chicago. Michael looked at her, his voice quiet. Kate, why did you stay? You could have taken your fee and left. But you're here. Kate turned, her eyes meeting him. Because I see who you are, Michael. You've been through hell prison, betrayal, losing your mother. But you're not broken. You're raising Daniel, you're keeping the company going. I want to be around someone like that. Michael swallowed, his voice wavering. I'm afraid to trust. Emma, Jason, they took a part of me. Kate touched his arm, her voice firm. I'm not them. Give me a chance, Michael. Give us a chance. He looked at her, his heart pounding. He leaned down and kissed her, briefly but sincerely. She responded, her hand squeezing his. When they pulled away, Michael smiled, his voice soft. Okay, let's try. A year passed. Michael and Kate were seeing each other regularly, their relationship growing stronger. She moved into the mansion, becoming a pillar of support for Michael and Daniel. Daniel, now 4, called her Kate and gravitated toward her like a mother. Michael formally adopted him through the courts, making his guardianship permanent. He took Daniel to preschool, read to him before bed, taught him how to ride a bike. The boy became his center, a symbol of his new life. Wilson Construction slowly recovered. Michael hired new managers, signed contracts to build schools and offices. The company's reputation was still suffering, but his tenacity and Kate's legal advice were restoring the trust of his clients. He worked late, but came home to Daniel and Kate, finding a balance he had never known before. One day, Michael returned from the office to find Kate in the living room, looking through paperwork. Daniel was asleep upstairs. Michael sat down next to her, his voice tired. Long day? Kate nodded, her tone businesslike. Yes, the bank approved a new loan. We can expand the projects, but I'm worried about you. You're taking on too much. Michael took her hand, his gaze warm. I cope because you are here. You and Daniel are my family. Kate smiled, her eyes sparkling. And you are mine. But the past is still with you, right? I see how you freeze sometimes. Michael nodded, his voice becoming quieter. Emma, Jason, Richard. They're like shadows. I can't forget. But you make me look forward to it. Kate squeezed his hand, her voice firm. Then look. We're building something of our own. Don't let them take it away. Michael nodded, his face becoming determined. I won't give it to you. I promise. That night, Michael stood by Daniel's bed, watching the boy sleep. The past, the prison, the betrayal, Elizabeth's death still hurts. But here, in this house, with Kate and Daniel, he found meaning. He adjusted the blanket, his voice a whisper. I'll make you happy, buddy. I promise. He returned to the bedroom where Kate was reading a book. She looked at him, her smile soft. Everything is fine. Michael lay down next to her, his voice warm. Better than ever. Thank you. She kissed him, and he hugged her. The past was not gone, but the new life he was building was stronger. The Wilsons' mansion in Chicago's Lakeview sparkled in the morning sun. The lawn was neatly manicured, and a bicycle and a child's scooter sat on the porch. Michael Wilson, 45, stood in the living room, holding his 1-year-old son, Noah, with Kate. His dark hair was graying at the temples, but his face was calm. Daniel, 8, with dark curls, was playing with a construction set in the next room. Kate, 39, a lawyer and Michael's wife, was making coffee in the kitchen, her dark hair falling to her shoulders. The doorbell rang, breaking the morning silence. Michael handed Noah to Kate, his brows furrowed. "Who is this?" Tom said he would come later. Kate shrugged, her voice light. "Maybe it's delivery. Take a look." Michael walked up to the door, peered through the peephole, and froze. Standing on the porch were Jason Wilson, 39, and Richard Wilson, 69. Their clothes were shabby, their faces drawn. Jason, once the cocky one, looked broken, his hair thinning. Richard, the former bossy CEO, slouched, his eyes avoiding Michael's. Michael clenched his jaw, but opened the door. "Michael," Jason began, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk. Can I come in?" Michael crossed his arms, his voice cold. "Speak here. What do you need?" Richard cleared his throat, his tone uncertain. "We got out a month ago. Parole. We have nothing, Michael. Fines, lawyers, we're broke." Jason stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "We need help. Money, work. You own the company. Give us a chance." Michael looked at them, his face turning to stone. "A chance? You set me up. 4 years in prison, divorce, my mother's death, all because of you. And now you're asking for money." Jason swallowed, his voice shaking. "I know, it's our fault. I didn't mean for this to happen. Dad said it would save the company. I'm sorry, Michael." Richard nodded, his voice weak. "We were wrong, son. Elizabeth. She would have wanted us to stick together." Michael clenched his fists, his voice becoming sharper. "Don't call me son, and don't you dare talk about Mom. She died protecting me from you. You destroyed the family." Kate walked out onto the porch holding Noah, her voice firm. "Michael, who is this?" Michael turned, his tone softening. "It's Jason and Richard. They're leaving." Jason looked at Noah, his face contorting. "Is this your son? And where is Daniel?" Michael stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "Daniel is my son." Richard raised his hands, his voice pleading. "Michael, we don't want drama. Give us some money, a job in the company. We'll pay you back." Michael shook his head, his voice icy. "You've already shown what you're capable of. I won't give you a cent. Go away." Jason opened his mouth, but Michael slammed the door, his breathing heavy. Kate touched his shoulder, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" Michael nodded, his face relaxing. "Yes, they are the past. You, Daniel, Noah are my present." Kate smiled, kissing him on the cheek. "Okay, let's go to Daniel. He wants to show you his new constructor." That same afternoon, Michael and Daniel stood in the backyard of the mansion. The sun was shining brightly, the grass was soft under their feet. Daniel, wearing a baseball cap and sneakers, held a small bat, his eyes shining with excitement. Michael, with a baseball glove on his hand, tossed the ball, his voice warm. "Ready, buddy?" he asked, smiling. "Hold the bat tight." Daniel nodded, his curls peeking out from under his baseball cap. "Yes, Dad, throw it away." Michael threw the ball softly and Daniel hit it, sending it into the grass. He jumped up and down, his voice full of joy. "I got it. Did you see?" Michael laughed as he ran towards him. "Great strike, champion." Again. Daniel nodded, and they continued. Kate came out onto the porch, holding Noah, her face alight with a smile. She called out, her voice playful. "Michael, don't teach him to hit like you. We need a champion." Michael turned around, his eyes shining. "Don't worry, he's already better than me." He picked Daniel up, lifting him onto his shoulders. The boy was laughing, swinging the bat. Michael looked at Kate and Noah, his heart filling with warmth. Jason and Richard, prison, betrayal, it was all behind him. Here, on this lawn, with his family, he had found what he was looking for. He placed Daniel on the ground, his voice soft. "Come on, again, buddy. Hit hard." Daniel nodded, bracing himself for the shot. Michael threw the ball, and it flew into the air, taking with it the shadows of the past. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.